Decorum, please. Decorum. All right, good afternoon. Start off with a senior personnel announcement. I'm delighted to announce that the Secretary General is announcing the appointment of Victor Kisob of Cameroon as Deputy Executive Director of the UN Human Settlements Program, otherwise known as UN Habitat, and that is at the Assistant Secretary General level. He succeeds Asa Kirabo Kasiera of Rwanda. The Secretary General is grateful for her dedicated service to UN Habitat. Mr. Kisob brings to the position more than 2 decades of service in human resources management, spanning international affairs, policy, strategy, operations, knowledge management, and partnerships, coupled with a comprehensive background in the field within the UN system in Somalia, Israel, Palestine, Zambia, and Ethiopia. And we have more on his career in my office. Turning to Syria, the United Nations in Syria condemned today the attacks on civilians in different parts of the country, including the terrorist bombings in SWEIDA city today that resulted in scores of civilian deaths and injuries. A statement issued by Ali al-Zatari, the humanitarian coordinator for Syria, reiterated the UN's call for protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, sparing them the brunt of violence and conflict wherever they are. And also, Stéphane de Mistura, the special envoy for Syria, is briefing the Security Council this morning via video conference from Geneva, and that is in closed consultations. Nikolai Mladenov, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, said today he was greatly encouraged by the recommendation of the World Bank's board to allocate $90 million, up from $55 million last year, in response to the alarming economic circumstances in the occupied Palestinian territory, particularly in Gaza. And yesterday's Security Council meeting, there was a lot of discussions on UNRWA, and today they have asked us to share the following information, that UNRWA said today because of the emergency assistance is critically underfunded in the occupied Palestinian territory, the agency has been forced to take a number of mitigating measures. As a result, in the West Bank, UNRWA will discontinue its cash for work activities effective July 31st. However, households assessed in the last 2 years as being abject poor will be transitioned to the Social Safety Net program, a core program of the agency which UNRWA is determined to continue. This will ensure that the most impoverished refugees inside camps continue to receive assistance and become eligible for other forms of support which are not available under Cash for Work. The Bedouin Communities Food Assistance Program will continue operating until the end of 2018, with UNRWA and its partners, the World Food Program, actively working to secure funds for its continuation next year. The Community Mental Health Program will be discontinued after August 31st of this year. UNRWA is currently coordinating options to continue working with select communities alongside other UN agencies. Finally, mobile health clinics will be discontinued effective October 31st. UNRWA is identifying possible partners for continued service also to select communities. As a result of these measures, 154 staff members hired against the now depleted emergency funds will not have their contracts renewed after their contracts have reached their expiry date. And UNRWA also today issued a statement condemning the killings of children and calling for an independent and transparent investigation into the death of a 14-year-old refugee student at UNRWA's basic boys' school at a camp near Bethlehem, which took place yesterday following a large-scale incursion by the Israeli security forces into the camp. And our humanitarian colleagues tell us they're concerned with the continuing raging wildfires in Greece, which have resulted in the deaths of at least 80 people and have injured many more. The Secretary General expressed his deep condolences to the relatives of the victims and the Greek government and commends the national response by the Greek authorities. The United Nations stands ready to support the government and international efforts in responding to this disaster. And you saw that yesterday afternoon we issued a statement from the Secretary General expressing his sadness at the loss of life in the Lao People's Democratic Republic following the break of the dam. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that many people are still missing, with up to 13,000 believed to have been affected and 4,000 people estimated to have been in need of humanitarian assistance. OCHA is in contact with the UN Resident Coordinator's Office in Laos and is ready to assist if requested. And the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, today expressed deep alarm at persistent reports of human rights violations and abuses in English-speaking northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon, as well as in the extreme north. He said this was regrettable that the government of Cameroon had failed to grant the Human Rights Office access to the northwest and southwest despite repeated requests. The High Commissioner said that heavy-handed security responses that the government appears to have employed since October last year will only make matters worse for the women, children, and men caught in the middle. To prevent the situation from deteriorating further, he urged the government to launch independent investigations into reports of human rights violations by state security forces, as well as abuse by armed elements. And I will pause here to take your questions. Yes, Michelle.
Thanks, Stéphane. Yesterday, there seemed to be a little confusion about some French humanitarian aid for Syria that was delivered by Russia and was supposed to be distributed or overseen by the UN. Can you explain to us what exactly happened? The UN said it wasn't involved, then it was involved. What happened?
I just want to bring some clarity to it. First of all, we welcome the recent French-Russia initiative to deliver humanitarian aid to Eastern Ghouta, and we stand ready to provide all necessary support to ensure this important humanitarian operation is a success. We continue to work closely with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent and other local partners to ensure that life-saving aid reaches as many Syrians as possible in Eastern Ghouta and in the southwest of Syria, as in many other locations. We are fully supportive of these efforts by France and Russia to deliver aid. We do not have a supervisory role in distribution of aid, which is carried out by the Syrian Arab Red Crescent with the participation of the UN. And OCHA stands ready to provide whatever support is needed to ensure this important humanitarian effort is a success.
So the UN isn't supervising it?
No, but we do not have a supervisory role in the distribution of aid, but we are involved in the actual physical distribution.
Okay, yeah. Right. Okay. But in partnership with
In partnership with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent.
Okay. Can you explain the confusion then yesterday?
Communications issues, as it often happens. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. You read the UNRWA announcement on the cuts in services. Mm-hmm. Does the Secretary General have any comment on these cuts?
Well, I think our concern is obviously with the lack of funding at UNRWA, and we would like to see much broader support, financial support for UNRWA. The Secretary General has always believed that UNRWA plays a stabilizing role in the region. I think the UNRWA and its leadership is managing the situation as best it can. And, this is not just a problem with UNRWA. We've seen it with other humanitarian emergencies. When the money runs out, hard decisions have to be made. When the money runs out, the money runs out. And that means aid stops from being distributed, mental health support, all these programs that are often critical to populations in need, whether they are in the occupied Palestinian territory, whether they are with refugees in Lebanon, where we've seen where in the past World Food Program has had to cut aid, or in humanitarian emergencies across Africa, which are almost all very much underfunded. At some point, decisions have to be made, and that's what UNRWA is being forced to do right now.
Follow up?
Yeah.
So the UNRWA statement, Steph, talks about the $300 million. We know what they're referring to in that statement, to the United States cutting back. Your statement now talks about much broader support. Are you therefore agreeing with the U.S. ambassador as she spoke in the council yesterday, as she named countries that perhaps weren't doing as much as
it's not about. First, I'm not in the business of agreeing or disagreeing with what
much
ambassadors
broader
say.
support mean?
I think any humanitarian appeal should have broad support from all member states, and we recognize and we appreciate the generosity of those who have given, and we would like the membership as a whole to contribute what they can to all of our humanitarian appeals. Mr. Avni.
Yes, as to the downed Sukhoi, Syrian Sukhoi yesterday, does UNDOF have any information as to where exactly it was downed, whether it was on the Israeli side, as the Israelis say, or the Syrian side?
No, the information they have is what they were able to report with their own eyes, which is where the debris fell. And I think I went through that yesterday. The IDF told UNDOF that they had fired on the jet as it was 2 kilometers inside of the Israeli-occupied Golan, and the Syrian security forces, armed forces, told UNDOF that in fact the jet was within the Syrian airspace within Syria when it was down. So we have those 2 accounts. Obviously, if we have any more information from UNDOF, we will.
And my lying eyes have nothing to do with.
No, I was waiting for you to refer to your own eyes.
A follow up on this: where exactly is UNDOF stationed right now? Is it back to full deployment on both sides of the border?
I will check with you. I think it was observation post 54, if I recall. But I will check whether they are fully back to everywhere they were before this crisis started. Yes, ma'am.
Follow up on UNRWA too. Why didn't we see actually more action from the side of the Secretary General regarding the funding, except for issuing some statements like trying to put more pressure on countries to fund, having a press conference to talk only about it, etc.
The Secretary General doesn't have a checkbook, right? There are 193 checkbooks. He has regularly, privately, and publicly encouraged member states to give and to support UNRWA. He participated in 2 UNRWA fundraising conferences. One was in New York. The other one was in Rome. He went to Rome, where he stood side by side with Pierre Kreinbuhl to encourage member states in the strongest possible terms to give money and to give generously. So I think he has been doing his utmost to, as you say, put pressure on member states. But at the end of the day, the checkbook is not in his jacket pocket. Nizar.
Yeah, thank you, Stéphane. First of all, thank you for your endeavors regarding Easy TV. It's working better today.
I take all the credit. I told you I was soldering those cables overnight. So
yeah,
I do want to thank our colleagues at OICT and BCSS, who I know have been trying to focus on it. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is regarding Syria and the return of refugees from Lebanon. Is the United Nations in any way helping those refugees to return?
I will check with UNHCR. I do not believe they are, but that's a question really for UNHCR.
Well, staying on Syria, today there was a major attack by ISIS. Some of those who attacked SWEIDA area and massacred dozens of civilians came from an area called Tanaf, where there is a U.S. base there. And this is what the locals are saying, and the reporters on the ground revealed that. Did the United Nations spot any movement from that area? And
we don't have the monitoring capacity to confirm or deny the reports that you're talking about.
as for the Red Sea area, where there is obviously a Saudi vessel has been hit today, since you have UNVIM on the ground there and they are investigating and watching all the cargo going in and out, was this vessel a military or a civilian one?
I don't. I will. UNVIM is there to monitor cargo. It is not there to monitor security incidents. But if I have any information, I will share it with you, Mr. Avni.
Follow up on that. Since this was Bab el-Mandeb, which is a place where a lot of the world commerce goes through, does the Secretary General feel there's a danger to freedom of navigation in that as a result of the Yemen wars?
The Yemen crisis is not making things simple, obviously, for those who are who ply those waters. The Secretary General has always highlighted the regional risk of the continued fighting in Yemen. Michelle, and then we'll go.
Steph, sorry, this seems to be just breaking now, so you may not be aware. The South Sudanese government and the main opposition group, led by Riek Machar, have signed, initialed a peace deal.
As I often said, this is asymmetric warfare. I don't know, so
Okay.
not that I don't trust you, but let me verify on
If
my
you have a
end.
comment later on. Just
Yep.
related to that, on DRC, has the SG attempted to speak to President Kabila since his trip?
He has not, and we have not received a phone call either. Yes,
On
ma'am.
Iraq, any comments, and to which extent is the mission there following what's going on the ground, demonstrations, arrests, and etc.?
Yes, I mean I know they're following the situation, this situation very closely, and as well as movements on all sides.
Yeah, but do you have any statements?
Nothing more at this
But
point.
this has been going like since at least 10 days. And people were arrested, sometimes internet, social media was cut.
I think it's important that people's rights to demonstrate freely and peacefully be respected, and I'm sure the mission is monitoring closely, as we say. Nizar and then Benny.
Well, Saudi Arabia is digging some kind of separating Qatar from the rest of the Arab Peninsula by sea. And this is, of course, an ecological issue, not only political. How does the United Nations view such
I mean, I've
change
seen
of
those.
ecology?
I've seen those press reports. I'm not aware that any work has actually started. Yes, sir.
Any update on the status of Matthew?
Nope. When there is, he will know, and you will know. On that note, au revoir.